Okay. Look, so what I wanted to ask, like, clearly, this Vipassana thing is not working for me, so I switched to what you recommended, the breath. Because everything was fine except the instability. I cannot handle that. So I just want to understand the part one, this calming the body, tetrad. It's like, you mentioned I should focus only on the breathing, right? I know breathing long, I know breathing in and breathing out. But then it goes to the nostrils, and then also it goes to building nimitta, or what is that? I don't really understand these points.
All right, well, let me address that first. First off, the nimitta was not something that's found in the suttas. That's what you would call later Buddhist practices. But it's the incorporation, so it does have the roots back to the time of the Buddha because it's incorporating aspects of one kind of meditation with another. All right. Now, the Buddha practiced Anapanasati and recommends that it be practiced, mindfulness of breathing, because it brings us into the internal world, which is where the problems ultimately lie. Though the beginners and all of the religious folk tend to think that the problems, if not actually existing on the outside, can be fixed by something on the outside. And that this gives rise to religions and governments and all kinds of things. But that the Anapanasati takes that change of focus from the outside to the inside. Now, before the time of the Buddha, there was actually meditation practices that would take people into fairly deep states that had to do with the outside. These were called kasina meditations, and in fact, the four foundations of mindfulness, the satipatthana, which is the body, is actually referenced or part of that, in the sense that the original meditations were earth meditations, water meditations, fire meditations, air meditations. Now, the air meditations gave rise eventually to things like meteorology, astronomy, and astrology. Fire meditations are very interesting because fire meditations seem to be able to take and absorb the mind very, very quickly. Not only that, but a fire itself, because it's giving off and emitting light directly, that when it hits the eye, that it changes the eye just a bit so that if you close your eyes, you can still see the fire. When you do earth or water meditations, that especially the earth meditations are called kasina meditations, and they're normally known by the colors. If it's translated as blue, that's a wrong translation. The actual translation is for green, because leaves start off as green, and they sew the leaves together in a little round disc. And over time, the colors of the leaves will change, but the vines or the veins and the structure of this little thing that we've made remains the same. And so the kasina meditations use the nimitta. The nimitta is an internal sign or an internal representation of what can be seen, so that they take these external objects and they'll look at them. Then they close their eyes and try to mentally reconstruct it as accurately as possible. And then they'll open their eyes again. And then they'll close their eyes. Now, naturally, while you're doing this particular process, it actually does help eradicate the hindrances, because normally the hindrances are both visual and auditory mixed together inside the head or inside the mind, so that when you're doing these kasina meditations, by working with this nimitta, it really concentrates the mind very, very quickly. So, the whole point, though, is that we do not want to develop merely concentration. We want to develop right noble concentration that has wisdom as its foundation rather than oblivion. in that regard, using this word nimitta for this internal sign, when we apply that to Anapanasati, now Anapanasati is possibly of all the meditations the one that's most difficult to do with jhanas. That Anapanasati was not designed by the Buddha to do jhanas. That we already had really good jhana stuff going. But you can do the Anapanasati with jhana by beginning to make the mind one focused, and that we do that after the first jhana, going from the first jhana to the second jhana, and perhaps even higher, that by taking the breath, and instead of doing it the normal way of Anapanasati, the second step then is to start chasing the breath as you're making it longer and longer. And what I mean by chasing the breath is that you, in the beginning of the in-breath, you place your awareness at the nose tip, and then as you're breathing deeper and deeper, you move your awareness down through the esophagus, making sure that you can actually touch and make contact with that air so that you can actually feel the sensations right down into the lungs. All right? And then that's called the chasing or the following of the breath. After we practice that for a while, so that will really help concentrate the mind, the next thing is to have the mind focus right on the tip of the nose. And the reason that place is used is because while you're breathing very subtly and watchful, mindful, you can actually experience the touch of the breath outside the body on the touch of the skin as it around the nostrils. Some people can feel each nostril separately, but most people will do it between the nostrils. And by focusing the mind in this point, and watching the breath there, you can actually experience the touch of the breath. And as you're breathing in and breathing out, that changes. But the point is that between the out-breath, before the next in-breath, can you experience that same sensation of the touch of the breath while you're not breathing? Now, normally it's explained like a touch of cotton, or a tuft of cotton, or a piece of wool, or just a touch, but it's kind of an airy-fairy or a wispy kind of sensation or feeling. And that normally, since monks shave, we don't have a lot of experience with meditators who have big mustaches. So I'm not sure about what to do with a mustache. But the point of it is about these nimittas is that it's possibly not a good idea for students to practice a deeper level than what they're actually ready to practice. And that this is one of the problems with having a big organization like at Wat Suan and Mo, to where you'll find many different people at many different levels of practice, that it winds up that the beginners are listening to what the advanced students are doing, and they want to do that rather than what they should be doing. It's very much like the occasional student who's taking his first course in algebra becomes suddenly interested in calculus and topology. A little bit much for him, but at least he's showing the interest.
So can we simplify whole process in the sequence? Like you start with the long breath, right? You focus on the breath as a concept, I guess, right? First, and then when it's easier, you move to the following the breath in and out of nostrils, right?
Right.
At some point, it becomes observing, right, instead of just following. And then what?
Well, following is a description of the kind of observing that we're doing.
Yeah, but I mean by following, the breath is more coarse, I guess, and when we're observing is already refined, right? So it's not like, I guess what I'm saying when I start.
No, what we're not refining is the breath. What we're refining is our ability to distinguish the contact of the breath inside of the body. This is what we mean by following the breath, is because as you breathe in, you can, especially with a hard breath, you can experience breathing right into the nostrils. By similarly taking a hard breath, you can also experience it perhaps right down to the throat. And there's a very good reason to start putting attention in that area of the body, because that's the area of the body that you can in fact experience sensation that's the closest to the reptilian part of the brain, the amygdala. And so one of the qualities of what they call throat meditation, which is part of the following of the breath, is the eradication of fear. And so we can actually follow the breath and get down into that area so that we can actually experience things deeper into the body. A lot of students will bypass that step and go directly to putting the awareness at the nose tip. But really, we don't ever need to do that. That these are deepening techniques that we've got far more important work to do. And that far more important work to do is to figure out what the Buddha was teaching. Let us say this, that we only need the first jhana in order to get the mind fit for work. And once the mind is fit for work, then we put it to work. In other words, if we get a sword sharp enough to cut what we need to cut, then why do we continue sharpening the sword? If you continue sharpening the sword without ever using it, what are you going to do? Eventually the sword is just going to dwindle away.
Yes, but can we simplify the sequence up to the first jhana from the first tetrad, calming the body?
Yes.
So that's like I mentioned, right? Long breath, in breath, out breath we start with. Then we move following the nostrils, the wind coming in and out.
No, right? we don't need to move to there. We need to stay with the long breath.
Only?
Yes.
So like
only
it's like
the long breath, long rhythmic breathing, long slow breathing is all you need to do. And here's the reason that I'm saying that is because neurophysiology, newer studies are showing that if the students will stay focused on this long breath, that the cardiovascular system will begin to change. Now, one of the things that I was curious about very early on with meditation is the Buddha talked a lot about breathing meditation, but he never talked about watching the heart rate or trying to slow the heart rate or do any of that kind of stuff. What I'm finding now through neurophysiology and neuroscience is that they actually are connected, and by watching the breath enough, the body will start to control the breathing, or the heart. Also, in this sequence is that when the mind is in a normally clouded, upset, distressed state, that the heart rate is erratic, that the blood pressure is erratic, and that we've never had really good measurement tools. The old style sphygmometer that just does systolic and diastolic over a period of time is a very slow device that only gets kind of maybe just a momentary thing, but it doesn't give you a good record. Now that we're beginning to get good records, we can see that this long, slow, deep, rhythmic breathing actually does have an effect upon the heart, in the sense that the heart rate slows down and that the blood pressure comes down and that the blood pressure becomes more rhythmic. And in the sense that the top part and the bottom part are always at about the same place, to where when the heart rate is not when it's erratic, it can go up and then down and then up a little bit and then way down and then way up and then up again like this. And so it's all over the place, and it's hard to get accurate blood pressure readings until the heart does actually settle down. And the way to get the heart to settle down is through, or the guaranteed way of doing it is long, slow breathing. If you'll ever have noticed, and I've noticed a lot, about getting your blood pressure taken at the doctor's office, is oftentimes they'll take it after you're sitting down for a while. They want you to just not come in and have it taken. They want you to sit. And then later, they'll have you have it taken a second time after you've even rested more. But none of the people who are doing that know that they need to actually be controlling and watching their breath in order to get their blood pressure good.
And that probably means breathing through the nose, right?
No, it doesn't. I think that it's more natural and normal to breathe through the nose because the air is more well warmed and also filtered as it's coming in. To where when you breathe through the mouth, the dirty air comes in and gets a lot of moisture mixed in with it. So actually breathing through the nose is better if you can.
Yeah, for 3 years I've been breathing through the mouth. I don't know, some kind of sinuses I have, but what I noticed, like lately, since I switched, instead of this fast noting to, more like a traditional approach, I see if you breathe through the nose, it somehow cools down the system. But once I breathe through the mouth, I get quickly into blissful states, but in a way like I'm extremely excited, Like I can get bliss and all of that, but it's very weird. It's like I'm really excited. I have more tension breathing through the mouth. This was very interesting to me. It's like zero equanimity is more like in your face type of, effect that I have.
Exactly. What you're talking about is the Pali word that's used is called piti and is wrongly translated as rapture. It does have those blissful elements that you're talking about, but it also has that excited quality to it. That in
But
fact,
that's like stupid energy I raise. In that energy, like it's very bad for observation. It's very good for throwing bricks all day and whatnot, Like this kind of a pit I have lately, like this coarse energy that I want to either run really fast or like, I don't know, chop wood all day. It's like stupid energy,
Mm-hmm.
And that probably what... Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm listening.
No, I was about to say that was my main problem, why I would be calling you all the time, because it seems on the one side it would work. I would have like what I suppose is jhana or blissful state, but at the other, side, this pitta or how you call it is too much tension in my body. Like my body is like undergoing some serious stress, yet I'm meditating, So meditation would cause me a lot of stress in that way.
And you're saying that this has happened because of the mouth breathing?
I think so, because
showed you. Okay.
Because I breathe through the nose only 1 week. It's kind of hard for me because I still have some stuff in my nose that I cannot breathe properly, but it cools the system down. I have equanimity, at least a little bit of that. And the other mouth breathing, I have everything that I'm supposed to have, the pittis, the sukkas, but on top of that, I have this like weird tension. If the dog barks outside, I absorb the barking immediately.
I understand. I understand. Now, let me explain it kind of like this, because I think that you're making a small misconnection in the sense of cause and effect relationship. That this excitedness that you're talking about, this associated with the bliss, is a normal state for people to pass through. Part of the excitement has to do with the fact that these states are new and you've never had them before. And
so that interrupt is not new. It's been like for 2 years or so I've been able to access it.
All right. Well, it's time that you go ahead and move past this then. And that basically, if the excitement that is there is something that needs to be cooled down, and that doing that cooling down can be done with the nostril breathing, then I would recommend that for you to do, though it's been slow to get you to do that, because I know that you've been doing the mouth breathing, and that I think that it would be better for you to continue to do that nose breathing, even if your object is not going to be at the nose tip trying to develop a nematode, but rather just doing the breathing through the nose. And as you know, it does have a cooling effect on the body that mouth breathing perhaps doesn't. It also has another advantage of help keeping the lungs free from moisture, to where mouth breathing actually adds to the moisture of in the lungs. Now, the breathing, if it's constricted because of ill health or a cold or something, there's many different techniques that you can do that can help clean out the nostrils. One of them is in fact, possibly the one that's best well known is swimming in the ocean.
I don't have ocean, sadly, near me.
Well, we'll go into that too. Let's talk about why swimming in the ocean has to do. It's because the salt water gets in there and starts to break up the mucus or whatever that's in the nostrils. And so when the salt water drains out, it carries a lot of the stuff with it. So we can actually do that. The Indians have, through Ayurvedic medicine, have had a technique that's similar to that, and adding a little extra to it by using warm water. So ultimately, use regular water, use salt water, use warm water, but the most effective is warm, salty water. And that one of the ways of doing that is by holding the water in your hand and then using one of the other fingers to close one nostril and then dip the other nostril in this little bit of water that you've got in your hand and suck it in. Something like this. With my little finger, I'm holding this nostril, and then I'll breathe it in with that nostril. And then I throw it out as best I can. And then on the other hand, I'll use my thumb to close that nostril and breathe in that water. This will help clean out the nostrils. And if you do that on a regular basis, it'll really eventually get them all cleaned out so that you can breathe normally.
It's okay for me. It's only becoming harder to breathe when I focus on the narrow area, like the nostrils, Somehow I create detention inside my body, and then detention ends up blocking the nose, But if I focus on the wide scope, like you mentioned, only the breathing in, breathing out, it's okay. I can breathe through the nose.
All right, okay, so let's go with that then. That's the way of that you're wanting to work with this. Because the important thing is to get the mind fit for work, as opposed to taking the mind in really deep states of jhana.
But just to quickly interrupt, I want to ask, if I only focus on breathing in and breathing out, isn't it like sidestepping the book, which is like by the steps, right? You focus on the long breath, then you focus on the nostrils, then the nimitta appears, and only then you move to the Vedana, right? The pitta rises.
It depends upon which book you're reading.
The one that I took from you is like the Buddhadasa book, Anapanasati, right?
Right. I remember it, okay? But that's not the sum total of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's writings.
So
but in fact, what I would like for you to do is to move out of that part of the book and into the deeper part of the book, starting with about page 213, 215, something like that, on the Sita Nupassana. Because that's what you're really needing to starting to work on, especially with the concept of...
I get it. I read that book a bunch of times, but I mean, up to the Sita point, I must build up the jhana, right? At least something.
No. Only the first jhana. You do not need the higher jhanas.
That's what I mean. So just by focusing on...
And the way to get to that first jhana is through also all four foundations of mindfulness, including the Sita Nupassana. that investigating the mind now, when you can get the mind free, is actually more available for investigation. And that what we need actually to investigate, and I'll use this as a preliminary for our next talk, which we've already discussed, will be on the Eightfold Path. The first thing that needs to be really investigated is the Four Noble Truths in respect to, is this suffering, or this is suffering in the mind? This is suffering, this is what causes the suffering, and this is what it's like to be free from suffering. These three things need to really be investigated. All right? This is suffering needs to be looked on in the sense of this is on the outside and this is on the inside. By doing that, you'll begin to gain compassion for other people by seeing their suffering when you're around them. But for yourself, you need to see suffering. As you know, the teaching of the Buddha is all around suffering and no suffering, dukkha, dukkha nirodha, that's his entire teaching. His entire teaching is not meditation or jhanas. His teaching is the teaching about suffering and no suffering, and so we need to start spending time looking at what is suffering, what is the nature of suffering, and in one way, the really big things that humans have to deal with is old age, sickness, and death. And I'm talking about them in that particular order because the sickness of youth is not real sickness unless it's death. But everyone will, if they're lucky, will experience old age, and in old age they'll get sick, and in sickness they will die. And this is the way that it happens with everyone. So this is actually suffering. We all are going to die, and if we're not ready for it, if we're not prepared for it, if we don't know how to do it properly, then we're going to suffer greatly from it. So now that we've looked at the really heavy stuff, we can start to look at the real problem with old age, sickness, and death is that we don't like it. We don't like being sick. We don't like getting old. Well, some of us don't. Some of us are okay with it. And we don't like dying.
This type of thing is not arrived by intellectualization, right? We must do practice, right? So then you're able to see.
Right. Many people will intellectualize this. Many people, in fact, understand the teaching of the Buddha intellectually, but they do not have the experience of it. The real depth of this, in fact, will, when you really fully understand the nature of suffering and the cause of suffering and what it's like to be free from suffering, these first three noble truths, that will lead you to the understanding of who you are. Because in that second noble truth, we start to look at how the mind actually works. Paticca Samuppada. So this is more important for your practice, is for you to really figure out how you suffer, what your suffering is, and how to bring it to a finish.
But for that, you do need the first jhana, right? You need to be calm to investigate all these things, right? And slightly joyful.
The second jhana is too much. The second jhana, the first jhana puts us in that sweet spot so that we can really do the right investigation. The second jhana makes us too passive, too peaceful. We enjoy what we're doing too much, and we don't do the investigation. In fact, it's really hard to investigate dukkha when you don't have any.
So the first one, the first jhana, is really like reachable by focusing only the in and out breath as a concept. That's it?
Regular, long, slow, in and out breath that's being done over a long period of time can actually be considered first jhana. Why? Because you're not thinking about whatever you're thinking about. You're thinking about a long, slow, easy, deep breath.
Okay.
And that's enough.
And that will carry to all the further tetrads, like out of this will rise the piti, then the sukha, right? Is enough?
Because once you get into that state of peacefulness in that first jhana. Then when the thoughts come up that start to distract you, you can catch them really fast. You can see, aha, there you go. Come on back. Come on back to the breath. And also we can begin to investigate those thoughts to see that they're just suffering. Later and a little more deeper as we get and start to investigate, we begin to see the source of those thoughts. And we begin to see deeper how those thoughts are processed, and that the goal of those thoughts, or not the goal, but part of the process later on, is feelings arise. And that the feelings are what causes suffering, especially the feelings of wanting something that you don't have. And so that's one of the things that you can use on. What is it that Zans wants, that John wants right now? What is it that he wants? Because if he's wanting something, that's suffering. Now we can start recognizing suffering. But it's not the object that you want that's causing the suffering. It's the wanting it that causes the suffering.
But why, let's get back a little bit to technical details. Why is the book like have these nimitas, things added up, like nostrils, if it's unnecessary?
Because he's speaking to a wider, larger, bigger audience than just the beginners.
Mm.
This was done in Thai language. This was done to the Thais. This was done to a set of meditating monks who may have had years and years and years experience of it.
And what would be the additional benefit of the second tirjana? Is just more pleasure, that's it?
Actually, one of the ways of looking at it is that once you have your mind cleaned out, and let us say once you really have the Eightfold Noble Path, once you have knowledge and vision of what is and what is not the path, and you've eradicated doubt, and you've eradicated all your attachments to materialism and whatnot, the next question is, well, how are you going to spend your time? The answer is, oh, well, I've got a very delightful way for you to spend your time. It's called jhana. However, jhana is not for the beginner. It's for those who have nothing left on their plate to do.
Which is me, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's get all of the dukkha out of the way. Let's get all the suffering of the things that you want out of the way, so that you can be here now. Because in fact, if you look at it like this, jhana is nothing but just deeper and deeper layers of right now.
Okay.
But you can do it without the agitation. That in fact, this agitation that you're looking at, or that you're talking about, that needs also to be investigated. That in fact, you can see that is suffering. At that point when that stuff comes up, never mind how you got it or how you were breathing or any of that kind of stuff, but when that stuff comes up in the body, you need to see, oh, this is suffering. What is the source of this? Where does this stuff come from? This is agitation.
Okay.
And by looking at it, you can also begin to experiment with your breath to see if the breath has anything to do with it, in the sense of if you start breathing long, slow, deep breaths again, will that in fact take that agitation out? And if it does it also take out the bliss? So these are things that you need to work on for yourself to refine your own practice. But that you may be, in fact, needing to go back and forth between the long, slow, deep, rhythmic breathing that brings first jhana on, in relationship with the breath, watching it at the nose tip. And that instead of focusing on the body, on the chest, and focusing on the nose tip, you still want to have the breathing to be long, slow, deep breath, especially between the out breath and the next in breath. that you want to practice at that point in time between the out-breath to have it very, very long, very, very slow, and lasting for seconds, with the intention that as you're breathing out, at the end of the out-breath is also going to be when the mind stops, when it comes to rest, when the thinking is eradicated completely, or at least they're so far deep into the background that you can't even hear the stuff anymore. And then you want to hold that breath with that nimitta, and hold that breath for as long as you can until the mind starts up again. And when the mind starts up again, that's when you start to take that first long, slow, deep breath, and watch that nose tip of how that nimitta begins to change as you're taking in that deep breath.
Okay. But what you're saying is really enough to just focus on the breath as a concept, and it will lead up to the last tetrad, like the fourth, or it's not?
Well, the fourth tetrad is going to have to be paid attention to right along, right from the very beginning. In fact, the first instruction has to deal with that fourth tetrad. Why? Because the instruction is, if the mind wanders away, never mind, start again, which means that fourth tetrad of stop thinking about whatever you're thinking and come back and start thinking of the breath. So right from the beginning, we're working with all four qualities of all four tetrads. Even though they're written down in a book in a sequence, we have to actually practice them all one by one as they occur, not all at exactly the same time, but within a sitting session, you need to possibly deal with all of them. Now, once we get the mind free from the hindrances in that first jhana so that we can apply and direct our thought, we want to apply it and directly direct it towards an object of the mind that is worthwhile having, knowing that the standard random thought process is not worthwhile having in the mind, because it brings on suffering. It brings on regrets and remorse, plans and wants and things, doubts, restlessness, all kinds of things come up in those hindrances. But when the mind is focused and directed, instead of bringing it to the point of no thought, we direct it to something that's worthwhile. What is worthwhile thinking about? The Four Noble Truths is worth thinking about. This is suffering. This is the end of suffering. This is what it's like to be free from suffering. And in fact, that's the one that I want you to start concentrating on, or let us say focusing more on, is what is it going to be like to be completely free from suffering? What is it like to be free from suffering?
So just the breath itself as a concept, in and out, is enough.
In and out. In and out.
And that leads to the end goal, right?
Well, it will lead you to the point where you recognize there is no end goal. And that's the goal. The goal is to come to the goalless. The goal is to find out that there is no goal.
And it's enough, just the breath as a concept?
Yes. Well, not as a concept, but as a practice, as a skill to be developed.
No nostrils needed, nothing like that.
Well, you don't have to go to the nostrils, no. Not necessary. You can stay focused on the long, slow, deep breath to get the mind settled.
In the suttas itself, it never was said, right? The nostrils, it was never mentioned. Only the breathing in long, he knows he breathes in long, right? Only that kind of thing was written.
That's right. In the suttas, the nimitta is not mentioned. That comes after a time after the teaching of the Buddha. That's not part of the sutta teaching.
Okay, and this thing is only to get more pleasure, right? The nimittas and nostrils to have better concentration, so you can
That's
get.
one way. That's one way of looking at it, right? And for the arahant, it's a good way of structuring time, of being in great pleasure all the time.
The what? Could you repeat the sentence?
Yeah, it's better than having to deal with pesky students.
Yeah, for sure. Well, anyways, I think you answered the question. Just it's simple than it looks like, right?
Yes, it's a simple. It actually is simple. It really is simple. And it all boils down to that one phrase, never mind, start again, just like Goenka said, never mind, start again, never
Yeah, but
mind,
going,
start
I have
again.
like techniques, right? And this what I'm talking about is no technique, just long breath in and out, right? That's it.
Actually, Goenka is possibly better known for body scanning, which has a
Which is
value.
really
There
technical,
is,
right?
yeah, it's a not it's more systematic or organized in the way. They start at the top of the head, and when you get good sensation there, then you start moving it around your face and be able to understand your face. Then you go down to the neck, and then you'll take down one arm and then down the other. And then you really go after the chest with the body and the back and all of that, down to the legs, down to the tips of the feet, down to your toes. Can you actually feel the sensation in your toes? And this they
But
do over back and forth several times during an hour through a guided meditation. It's a very, very difficult practice to pick up without doing it on guided meditation, and for that reason, I don't use that technique with my students on Skype. But
it's really
it has
tiring, right?
value of learning the body. In fact, that third step of Anapanasati, experiencing the body, that's what the Goenka technique is in a very organized way, is step 3 of experiencing the whole body. And that's something that needs to be done. And in fact, part of the nimitta on the nose tip and the nostrils and following the breath and all of that kind of stuff is ways of experiencing the body. And the value of that is twofold. One, it brings us to the here now of the body. And two, it begins to wake up the body, in the sense that we're paying attention to it in ways that we haven't been paying attention to it, that we've been so focused on the outside world that we haven't been paying attention to things that happen on the inside. So when we have a feeling, we see something that happens on the outside, and then we have a feeling, we think that it was caused by what happened on the outside, and the student is not looking at the process of what happened between seeing that object and then having the bad feeling about it, so that they blame they misunderstand the cause effect relationship. They understand the cause of the suffering coming from the outside object, where in fact, oh no, it's coming from the inside, the way we're processing things. And so this is the source of suffering. This is the source of dukkha, is how we wrongly process information coming in from the senses. And so one of the ways of helping us get better understanding of the senses is by paying attention to the body. Because the body, in fact, is a huge sensory object. The eyes are only little dudes, but the body is huge, and it's got hundreds of millions of more neuron cells than the eyes do. Same way with the hearing. The hearing is little tiny little things. It's got a lot of processing power behind it in the brain. But you can look at the whole body as like it's a huge antenna picking up stuff. But it's picking up what most people would consider white noise, and therefore is just thrown out or disregarded. And where in fact, if we take that processing power and started looking and watching and come in contact and understanding the body, it'll help us be much more attuned to what's really going on in the world, as well as helping us to be here now in the world while all of that stuff's going on. And so paying attention to the body. So I would highly recommend Goenka without actually doing the formalized Goenka technique. A way of doing that, for instance, is having the mind rest on the chest, this area, as opposed to the nose tip, to have it set here. and to watch the long, slow, rhythmic breath. But in all cases, whenever the mind is going to be doing any thinking, the things that it should be thinking about are Dhamma. Two primary things, or you could say it like this: to look at the aggregates, or actually look at Paticca Samuppada, or you can look at the Noble Truths, which is also truth number 2 is looking at Paticca Samuppada. And so this is a way of the practice. Is what do we want to pay attention to? Is what's going on inside the mind. How do we feel?
Okay.
Why do we feel?
I will try.
Like that.
Thank you for explanation. I will try, and hopefully I will not have any problems, and I will stop calling you.
No, you don't have to stop calling me. I enjoy you calling whether we do any Dhamma or not.
Yeah, I keep spinning wheels, so hopefully something will work.
Excellent. All right. Well, give me a call and we'll do that Eightfold Noble Path thing.
Okay,
did I
thank
answer
you.
your
Bye-bye.
question well enough? I suppose
Yes,
I did.
very good. Very
Excellent.
good.
All righty.
Thank you.
Well, we'll see.
Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.